The Atlas 6, Tristan. There were times when Tristan's natural inclination towards cynicism served some larger, more enduring toxicity. A vast, chronic paranoia. Any rare glimpses of optimism were swiftly dealt with, a virus his mind and body leapt to attack, and thus were ultimately beaten into submission. Feelings of hope, cancerous. There was a constant sensation for Tristan that if things seemed to be going well, half of him was sure he was in the process of being mightily tricked, which was why the possibility he could do more with his magic than he had ever been aware of before joining the society was so stupendously upsetting. Were there logical reasons this might be true? Yes, of course. All skills became more refined when they were properly trained, particularly magical ones, and since Tristan had been either unidentifiable or misclassified for the majority of his education, it followed that he might not have experienced the true spectrum of his abilities until now. Did that stop him from wondering if he was slowly going mad instead? No, absolutely not, because the possibility remained that he and the others were being quietly but effectively poisoned. It was it would be a complex con, but a good one. If, if this was how he died, so be it. Whoever planned it would obviously deserve their intended result. It was difficult to explain which was why he had it to anyone. He sensed he was letting off certain undercurrents of agitation, though which was a suspicion Callum served to reinforce, always glancing over at Tristan reassuringly when he was feeling most unhinged. It was a conflict of the thing, the sense tension, the difficulty of seeing one thing and knowing another. Strangely, it had been something Libby said that did it. She had commented on Tristan's ability as if it were notable that he couldn't see her vision of reality, and from there it had been a tumble of deduction. It all hinged on a basic, undeniable fact that what Tristan could see and what the others could see were different. Other people, according to both Callum and Carissa, saw things based on their experiences, on what they were taught, on what they were told and true and what wasn't. Einstein himself, surprisingly not a medium, almost witch, certainly a witch though, had said there was no reality at all except in the relations between systems. What everyone else was seeing, illusions, perceptions, interpretations, was not an object form of reality at all, which meant that conversely what Tristan could see was. He could see in some sense reality itself, a true unbiased state of it. But the closer he looked, the fuzzier it got. It was late one night when he couldn't sleep, sitting cross-legged in the center of his mattress to test his eyesight again. Of course, it wasn't his actual eye he was using, it was some other form of looking, which he supposed was his magic, though he hadn't progressed to know what to call it yet. Mostly if he concentrated he could see little particles of things, like dust almost, where if he focused in on one thing he could watch its trajectory follow like its path. Sometimes he could identify something from it, a mood which told the former of a color like an aurora, which was still somehow none of those things because of course he hadn't honed the sense required to name it. He wasn't hearing or smelling reality and certainly wasn't tasting it. It was more like he was dismantling it layer by layer, observing it as a model instead. It had the same logical progression most other things possessed. Take the fire that had been burning in the hearth, for instance. The weather was getting colder now, moving briskly in autumn, and so Tristan had fallen asleep to the light dancing shadows falling, the smell of flames warming the air as flakes of ash floated down to the base of the wood. He knew it was fire because it looked like fire, smelled like fire. He knew from experience from his personal history that if he touched it, he would burn. He knew it was fire because he had been told it was fire. He had much been proven countless times. But what if it wasn't? That was the question Tristan was struggling with. Not about the fire specifically, but about everything else. A very existential crisis, really, that he no longer knew the difference between what was true objectively and what he merely believed to be true, because it had been told to him that way, was what happened to everyone. The world had been flat once. It was believed to be flat, so in the collective consciousness of it, or had been, even if it wasn't, or was it? It was giving Tristan such a monumental headache that he didn't even stop to question why someone would be knocking on his door at this hour. He simply waved a hand and summoned it open. What, he said, Tristan Lee. Turn down the catastrophe. catalysm. Would you? It's the middle of the night, said Persa prettily. She, he noted, was fully dressed, if a bit rumpled. He frowned at her, and she shut the door behind her, leaning against it. I obviously don't wake you, Tristan commented in observation, wondering if she would take the bait and explain. Unsurprisingly, she did not. No, you didn't wake me, but as a general rule, you could stand to calm down, she said, and then stepped further into the room. Moonlight fell on her from the window in the panel, just narrow enough that he could see the little furrow of concern in her brow. Each of Parissa's expressions was so artful they could hang in the Louvre. And not for the first time, Tristan wondered what on earth her parents must have looked like to achieve such outrageous genetic symmetry. Actually, my parents aren't particularly attractive, said Persa blandly, and my face isn't technically symmetrical, she paused, and then my breasts certainly aren't. I know, he hadn't specifically noticed, but it felt like the right thing to remind her, that he had been in the position to know at least several positions, and is that supposed to be self-deprecation or humility? Neither. Beauty is nothing. She waved it away and stole towards him, settling herself on the edge of his bed. She waved it away and stole. Everyone's perception is flawed. They have standards drilled into them by cultural propaganda. Nothing anyone sees is real, only how they perceive it. How very tropical, Tristan said grimly, which might have been intentional on her part, though at the moment he didn't care to dwell on which of his thoughts she was or wasn't using. What is it? He asked her. Clearly something's bothering you. I've just discovered something, I think, she toyed with her fingers, toppling them mindlessly in her lap. I'm not sure yet whether it will be in your best interest to tell you. In my best interest? Well, you're right, it wouldn't be in yours. You wouldn't take it well at all. She glanced at him, eyes narrowing. No, I can't tell you, she determined after a thought. But regrettably, I do want you to trust me. Perhaps you're unfamiliar with the concept of trust, Tristan pointed out, assuming that she almost certainly was. But it is very rarely based on nothing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're suggesting that you'd like me to blindly trust your judgment, despite having multiple things you're unwilling to tell me. I know the inside of your head, Tristan, Persa reminded him, the same way he's commented on his intimacy with her, albeit more confidently. She had actually taken stock of his details, whereas he, with her, had been mostly preoccupied. You wouldn't take it well. Ah, wonderful, Tristan muttered. You even conceded beautifully. When she shifted towards him on the bed, he caught a hint of her perfume, only it wasn't hers entirely. Persa had a signature scent, a spectrum of florals. At the moment there was traces of cologne, musks or something, masculine and smoky, which, to Eden's credit, Tristan's former fiancé had always been very careful to prevent. Eden Wessex might not have known that Tristan could see through her illusions, but she was a very beautiful adulterer. He had considered it, still considered it, in fact, to be one of her primary strengths. This society, Tristan said, jolting him back to the point, is not what I thought. They're telling us at least one lie. The restless feeling of resistance wrestled again, rearing up in protest again. The usual torment. Tristan wanted to believe the society was giving him something he could not have gotten otherwise. He was suspicious of what that something was. Now Persa was tipping the scales once again, feeding his inexhaustible doubt. I don't think there's anything to be done about it, Persa remarked curtly. Not yet, but I think it's worth knowing who we work for. Tristan frowned. Atlas, you mean? Or is it? She posed, pursing her lips. There are some answers I need to dig up. But in the meantime, you need to be careful. He hated to continuously express his bewilderment, but there was nothing for it. Me? Callum is influencing you, said Persa. I don't know if he's doing it, magically or otherwise. But he wants something from you. He's willing to blind you to accomplish it. I'm not a damsel, Persa. I don't need rescuing. That, much to the dismay of his vanity, only served to amuse her. Actually, I think you're precisely a damsel, Tristan. She reached out, touching his cheek. I know you don't trust Callum, she said, murmuring it. I think that's precisely what he's using against you. He's presenting you with his reality, thinking his candor will appeal to you. But you're not listening, are you, Tristan? You're not listening to what he really is, even when he says it to your face. Tristan sniffed. If I don't trust him, then what does it matter? Because even if you don't trust him, you believe him. He is influencing your perception by confirming everything you already believe to be true. He's planting things in you. And I worry. Her thumb stroked his jaw, floating over his lips. I worry, she said again, quieter. Tristan's immediate reflex was to mistrust Persa's softness. What did he do? He asked her. What could have possibly upset you so much? It didn't upset me, it unsettled me, she pulled away, and if you really must know, he convinced the illusionist to kill herself. Tristan frowned. So don't you see, his weapon is us, our beliefs, our weaknesses. He can turn them against us. From the faint light through the window, Tristan could see the tightening of her mouth. He finds the monsters we keep locked away and sets them loose, so why would I ever want him to see mine. Fine, Tristan permitted evasively. But couldn't you do the same? You can read minds. Should we regard you with the same suspicion? Krista rose agitatedly to her feet. There's a difference between what we are capable of and how we choose to use it, she snapped. Maybe so, but if you want me to trust you, you'll have to give me a reason. Tristan pointed out. Otherwise, how are you any different from Callum? She gave him a glare so sharp he could feel it, cutting himself on its edge. Callum, she said, doesn't need you, Tristan. He wants you. You should ask yourself why that is. Callum. Then she slipped out of his room and did not speak to him for 4 days. Now that it bothered him too immensely. The silence of temperamental women was a very common feature in his life, and anyway he did not know what to make of her. Warning, threat, unclear what she wanted, though he was privately pleased she hadn't gotten it. He hated giving people what they wanted, especially if it was unintentionally done. He was also extremely distracted. They were covering the many theories about time, beginning with attempts at time travel by witches in the Middle Ages, a conversation which also included, for some reason, the prominent European attempts at extending the mortal lifetime. In Tristan's mind, the concept of time should have been covered in the physical magics, not historical or alchemical features. Perhaps it was just an excuse to give them more access to another magical period in history. He was beginning to steal away privately more and more, pursuing his own research in the ancient texts they'd been reading about the construction of the universe before doubling back into the mysteries he felt unsolved. Why hadn't their wormhole successfully traveled through time? Did it really require more magic to influence that time? Or had they simply not gone about it correctly? He tried to draw it once, scribbling in his notes, while Dalton droned on about Magellan and the Fountain of Youth, but nothing came of it. Nothing, that is, until Liddy sought him out. It wasn't clear at first that she'd been intentionally looking for him. He had assumed she merely stumbled on him in the painted room after dinner, and would therefore hastily leave. It became apparent, however, that the stumbling was really just another side effect of her natural presence, and so he glanced up unexpectedly.